Purchase the IBEAM and other quality woodworking clamps by Bessey Tools. Simply better.
MicroJig, maker of the gripper. Work safer, work smarter.
With the build of the Bevel alignment jig finally out of the way, I can show you guys how it's used. And it's used in conjunction with a wheel style honing guide that you can get online pretty cheap. These honing guides work by allowing you to keep a consistent bevel angle as you sharpen your chisels. But the trick is getting the bevel angle set for the chisel quickly as you move from chisel to chisel as you sharpen your set of bent chisels. And the bevel angle is determined by how far forward or how far back the chisel is placed in the honing guide, and that's where this alignment jig comes into play. If you know the distance that you need in front of your chisel for a specific bevel angle, you can set the distance on your alignment jig by loosening the knob on the bottom and positioning this block of wood until you have the right distance, and then you just lock it down. And then you set the front of the chisel until it meets the block of wood, and the honing guide is also meeting the front of the alignment jig, and then you just lock down the honing guide. Now you have that bevel angle set, and you can very quickly jump from chisel to chisel and sharpen all of your chisels at the same bevel angle. We can take this a step further and make graduation lines along the side of the alignment jig for specific bevel angles, which would allow you to hone to a primary bevel and then quickly adjust the jig to a micro bevel setting. And we can do this by using a little trigonometry. All we need to do is determine the distance between the bottom of the bearing and the top of the chisel for the opposite side for a right triangle. And the distance between the center of the bearing and the front of the honing guide will make up part of our adjacent side for the right triangle. Now, if we know that we want a bevel angle of 25 degrees, we can then solve for the total distance between the center of the bearing and the front of the chisel. And we can set the alignment jig to that distance by first subtracting out the distance between the center of the bearing and the front of the honing guide. Because that explanation has the potential to come off sounding a little confusing, I'm going to go through an example where I make a graduation mark on this alignment jig at 25 degrees. Now, once you make a series of graduation marks for different honing angles, you only need to do the math once, because when you go to set the alignment jig to that specific angle, you don't need to do the math all over again. You just set it to that line. Now, if I want to set this for 25 degrees, like I said, I need to determine the distance between the bottom of the bearing and the top of the chisel. And for me, that's 1.31 inches, and I determine that by using a digital caliper. Then we need to determine the distance between the center of the bearing and the front of the honing guide. And again, we can use a digital caliper. First, we need to determine the diameter of the bearing, and then determine the distance between the back of the bearing and the front of the honing guide. And then we can subtract out the radius, or half of the diameter of the bearing, and then we'll know the distance between the bearing on center and the front of the honing guide. So once you have these two distances and you know you want an angle of 25 degrees, you can, by using trigonometry or tan math, you can calculate that adjacent side. So the distance between the center of the bearing and the front of the chisel. And for 25 degrees, that comes out to be a total distance of 2.81 inches. Now, because I can't just set the honing guide, or the alignment jig rather, to 2.81 inches, I need to first subtract out the distance between the center of the bearing and the front of the honing guide. And that distance was 0.91 inches. So that leaves me with 1.9 inches to give me a bevel angle of 25 degrees. So then I can just use my digital caliper and set the alignment jig to 1.9 inches and then lock it down. And now I have it set for a bevel angle of 25 degrees, and then I can make a tick mark or a graduation mark on the side of the alignment jig, and then I can very quickly go back to 25 degrees. So this is already set to 1.9 inches, so if I set my chisel and my honing guide and butt it up against the alignment jig, and then I've already gone through this process, and then once you tighten down the chisel and you have it set, the bevel angle should now be set to 25 degrees. And 25 degrees is usually the factory, it's what the factory, when you buy a chisel, the primary bevel is usually already set at the factory to 25 degrees. With this adjustable bevel angle jig, you can make graduation marks for all of your favorite chisel bevel angles and turn your sharpening time into a fun and amusing experience. That's all I have. Please consider supporting what I do here at Garage Woodworks through Patreon. You'll find a link in the first comment and in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.